Hi, my name is Quentin Walston. Welcome to today's jazz video. Today we're going to talk about jazz solos, how do instrumentalists know what notes to pick when they improvise. Now to help us, we're going to look at this through a jazz solo that we just listened to. It's by pianist Sonny Clark on his song Bootin' It. Now we're going to refer back and forth to this solo during the video and at the end actually look at his solo to see how these elements come into play. Now the elements that we're going to talk about today are how jazz musicians can outline chords, how they can use scales, how they can build a language through licks and quotes, and then we're even going to look at smaller melodic devices such as passing notes, approach tones, enclosures, and turns. Then, like I said, we're going to put it all together and listen to the solo at the end. Now, as we go through these various techniques, it's really helpful to understand that jazz songs follow a series of chords that we can call a chord progression. And soloists improvise in a variety of ways over any given chord. Or you can think of it as jazz musicians are playing notes that sound good or are best suited for any chord. So let's dive in and look at our first method of improvising, and that's outlining chords. Jazz musicians can get a lot of melodic material just from outlining chords. For instance, in Bootin' It, Sonny Clark outlines a G7 chord and a C minor chord in his improvised line. When we actually think of how these chords and these improvised melodies work together, it's almost as if the melody should be outlining the chords to some degree. Some jazz songs have so many chords going in them. They're just constant chord, chord, chord. It's the job of the jazz musician to play accordingly so that their lines actually help to outline the harmony, help to convey the chord progression at hand. So jazz musicians can get really creative just by using broken chords. They can do different rhythms, different inversions, that's spelling the chord in a different order, but they're still just using the bare notes of that chord. Now the next step would be using a scale. We hear about musicians practicing scales all the time, up and down, learning all of them, major, minor, all of that. Where that's helpful to a jazz musician is when we have this chord progression, when we have chords going on, there are certain scales that sound really good over those chords. So jazz musicians will want to know those scales so that they can improvise accordingly. So for instance, if we're going back to this B flat chord, maybe it would be really nice to do a B flat scale on top of it. Look at that, it sounds pretty good. But jazz musicians don't just run scales. Though we might see passages where they are just going up and down, but usually it sounds better to come up with a novel melody, a creative idea, using notes from that scale as opposed to only playing the scale. Now another idea I want to talk about is the lick. What is a lick or a riff or something like that? It's a phrase or a melody that another jazz musician has played that we're going to take out and learn. So for instance, I really like this passage from Sonny Clark's solo. I can learn that. I can incorporate that into my playing, thereby expanding my jazz vocabulary. Jazz musicians learn their favorite licks in different keys so they can apply them in a variety of contexts. Related to licks are quotes. A quote is when you play directly a pre-composed melody. So I could be doing a 12-bar blues and I might quote a Thelonious Monk blues over it. So I could be playing Tenor Madness, and on top of that, maybe I'm soloing, suddenly out comes Thelonious Monk. So quoting is incorporating someone else's pre-composed melody directly into your solo. Here's an example of me putting tenor madness into an improvised solo. Now, jazz musicians use a variety of smaller techniques and melodic devices within their solos, and a lot of these have to do with chromaticism. Chromaticism is all the little half steps between the main notes of your scale. So, for instance, you could use a chromatic passing tone to get from one note of the scale to another. This is very common in bebop. Let's say I have an F7 chord. I can use a chromatic passing note to get from F, the root, to E flat, the 7th. I can also pivot on that, but the idea is the same. Similar to chromatic passing tones are chromatic approach tones. That's where I'm leading to a specific note, a target note, from below or above via a half step. So if I'm still on F, I'm approaching all of these notes via a half step. Related to that is the enclosure. An enclosure is simply when you wrap around your target note. That can be above or below, half step or whole step. Now there are longer enclosures like that, or just short enclosures. The idea still stands that I'm wrapping around my target note using chromaticism. The last element that we're going to look at is the turn. Turns add melodic and rhythmic interest to a jazz line. Now usually they go up and back down over the target note. And they have a variety of rhythms, including triplets, 16th notes, sometimes just 8th notes. But they all have this little pop, this little ornament or embellishment that adds variety to a line. Here are some examples of turns. All right, now to finish off, we're going to put all of these concepts together. We're going to look at the improvised solo of Sonny Clark on his 12-bar blues, Bootin' It. Now, this song implements our outlines of chords, it implements scales, chromatic passing tones, enclosures, all of these devices that make up the content of an improvised solo. So we're going to listen to it first at full speed from the recording, and then we're going to slow it down and look at all the elements and how they play out. All right, that was awesome, but let's slow it down a little bit and see what was going on in Sonny Clark's solo. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, that was Sonny Clark's solo on Bootin' It. That is a really cool solo. So much is packed in there. I'd recommend that you watch that again, slow it down, pause it, whatever you need so you can really understand all of those elements that he uses. Also, as you continue to listen to jazz, look for these elements that we talked about. There's so much in the jazz vocabulary, and it's so helpful to now know a lot of what's going on. See if you can pick that out in your future listenings. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Quentin Walston. I hope you tune in to see our other videos and keep listening to jazz and enjoying the art form. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.